First of all, hello and welcome everyone to Roll Call's first live webinar. We are very happy you took out time on a Sunday to join us.
As most of you already know, we have Sharath Jeevan, who has been interacting with you so far. We have him with us today. Sharath is an INSEAD 2002 MBA graduate and one of the world's leading experts on intrinsic motivation. And he is not the biggest fan of long introductions. So we will let Sharath tell you his story. And Sharath, it's over to you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Ashley. And just say thanks, guys, for the invitation today. And really humbled and honored to be asked to just share a few thoughts and a few ideas with you. I know how important this time is, as we were saying earlier. And I just thought we'll spend just under an hour talking through a little bit of a few things around what I'm guessing some of you may be feeling like. I know it's, I graduated in 2002, which was a really tough year. Probably, if you can imagine it, a more challenging year than even this one. We had the dot-com crisis and the dot-com bust. We had 9/11. Yeah, they probably compete very, very heavily in terms of which was more challenging in some regards. But I had such a great time in INSEAD and enjoyed it so much. And but at the same time, there were things I didn't really realize when I was on campus, and even on the years after. I was in Fonty for the whole year, that I wish I had realized. And I thought what I might do today is just share a few of those thoughts with you as we go. And I've got a few slides, which are just a way for us to just keep a bit of a narrative going. But I'd love to keep this very interactive. So would you guys be okay just to keep, as Sugandha was saying, just keep chatting through any questions, thoughts, comments as we go through. And I might sort of pick on some of you to explain more and so on from what you said in the chat as well as we go through the discussion. Yeah, so we'll make it very interactive, go through. There are 5 areas I've talked about. We may not cover all 5, that's fine. But hopefully just a flavor of some of these themes that might be useful. Does that sound okay for today? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
sounds good. Perfect, guys. So looking forward to it. So this is a picture that I think is a very good and apt one for me, actually, which is a picture of a mongrel. This is Marina Beach in South Indian, Chennai. And I grew up here, and I'm the, I have a bit of a Mongol background. So I'm the son of parents from 4 states in India. I grew up in India, the UK, the Middle East. And for me, INSEAD was just an amazing chance to go to a place, or I should say, where being a mongrel was not that unusual or different, right? And such an amazing chance to meet so many interesting people from around the world. And already from just this call alone can see that shaping out, of course. But it was just such a special privilege, I think. And I remember being so excited at this time, thinking about the year ahead. I was in a house, I shared a house in Mili with an Italian, a Japanese, British, and an American. And so even that was a good microcosm of INSEAD overall. But just that chance to be in such a multicultural environment was pretty amazing as an experience. And I guess, just to be honest, I mean, after this year where most of us have been living on Netflix and working from home and takeout, and it's not been a very inspiring year. I'm super jealous for all of you who are able to go out and have an amazing year. In front, I know there are some questions about lockdown. I know these things are happening in France as well right now. But I still think compared to what most of us are going to be living next year, it's going to be an incredible year there. I'm just joking with Ashik and with Sugandha about tuition fees. So when I was there in 2002, I don't know I should say this or not, but I paid 35,000 euros, and I thought that was a lot. So I did actually. When I haven't been to the MBA site for a while, so when I had a look, my heart did, my jaw did drop a little bit as well. So it's good. But I just remember one thing I will say, guys, and is that I'm almost as confident as I can possibly be to say that from a financial point of view, INSEAD will be a good investment for all of you guys, right? It's just the way that education is prized nowadays in our world. Talk about that in the talk a bit, but the kind of doors it will help to open up, the lifelong value of it. I have no doubt that it'll be a good lifelong investment, right? It may pay itself off in 2 years, and 5 years, and 10 years, depending on what you choose to do afterwards, but it will pay itself off, right? So first, just say, please relax. I think if just have a little bit of a relaxed sense in the shoulders as well. It's going to be a very good financial investment. That's why I think it regularly tops the nowadays the league tables of so many MBA programs, right? Because it's such an efficient investment in some regards. And that was true of my class, even though we graduated in a very bad year in terms of sort of traditional recruitment. Actually, if you take a 5-year view, a 10-year view afterwards, it didn't stop anyone doing great what they want to do and succeeding in life generally. But I think what was interesting though is what INSEAD doesn't guarantee, in my view, is that you'll be happy and motivated afterwards, right? So I think financially, I think this is a great investment. I think it's and it certainly was for me, and it's paid itself off many times. But the broader question of will it help you achieve what you really want to do in life? I think it depends on how you use INSEAD and how we see INSEAD, and us going into INSEAD and staying through INSEAD in a mindset that allows us to really make the most of it in that sense. Does that sort of make sense? So I think really good news. I think that it is going to be probably one of the best financial investments that all of us, certainly I've made and all of you will make. But how you use it and set yourself up during the program and the years after and even these months before will make a big difference on how does it help you achieve that broader goal of being fulfilled, happy, motivated, and both in work, and we'll talk about that, but also even in life more generally. And I wanted to offer really 5 things I think that I wish I'd learned in that regard around that piece. I'll talk about my background a bit later, I think, just given time and so on today. But let me just start by just sharing the 5 things I was going to talk about really as the themes for today. And the things I wish someone had told me, someone had sat me down a bit like this and been honest with me, was around these 5 tensions I felt during INSEAD. And I've honestly, I felt them quite a lot through the years post the MBA as well. And one was around this idea of, the short-term path and the long road ahead, right? What's the tension there? With the kind of tuition fees that are out there, that there's a lot of short-term pressure, I know, on everyone. How do we keep that the goal focused on the longer term part? We'll talk about the idea of kind versus wicked problems. This idea, I think, of INSEAD and peer pressure, some of the things that will happen just by having 1,000, or I think your cohort about 650, is that right, of your promotion? Something like that on one in 1 or 2 places at one time. Is that right, Sugata?
Yes,
600 or something?
Yes, it's 650.
I know it's a bigger cohort than normal, so I've sort of understood that as well. So that's also going to create some interesting pressures. I guess the question, a 4th area on identity and how we think of ourselves as we progress after INSEAD, and lastly, just how things we might want to think about our broader life and how all this fits in as well. Does it make sense? These 5 areas, we'll touch on each of them in case, but I just want to check first of all, would anyone disagree about the reassurance? I saw a few thank you messages in the chat here on the thanks from Kenneth there as well. But is anyone still skeptical on the financial value side? Do you buy what I said on this being a good financial investment, first of all? Any responses in the chat? Yeah, thanks, Daniel. It's a good point. Yeah, I think it's all, as you said, there's a short-term pressure. I fully agree with that, right, as well. But we can talk about that a bit more as well. What are other thoughts on this? Ashur, just tell me do you mind just saying directly on here, what was a change you've seen already? You mentioned something about you've seen a change already.
So Sharath, I'll speak.
Yeah, please.
Yes. So as soon as I mentioned incoming MBA, INSEAD MBA candidate, within my own company, right, there are a lot of subsidiary startups, and one of the CEOs of those startups, earlier he was offering me head of customer success role, and as soon as he got to know that I got into INSEAD, I'm gonna go for 1 year, he started saying that, okay, why don't you come back and join me, and I'll give you a leadership role over here, right? So that's the kind of change in terms of short-term value that I'm seeing, that I'm already hearing. And from the long-term perspective, now, if I reach out to any of the big big folks, right? I'll just call them big folks at this point in time, because that's what I'm inspired by and what I'm aspiring to be in my career, right? Let it be McKinsey, BCG, Bain, any private equity firm, or any for that matter, any leadership, right, in the world. If I reach out to them on LinkedIn, 90%, 95% of the time, I'm going to get a response from them, right? Which I feel and I have experienced in the past, that was not the case earlier. So I think those are my 2 cents on how I'm feeling the change right away.
Thanks, Richard. It's a really interesting example and a very inspiring one. And I saw also in the chat, I think Nicholas had said, yeah, just that I fully agree, because I understand completely about, a lot of INSEAD is about the social experience. I was talking to Sikandar about this and Ashik as well. And but I understand, at least my understanding is they've done a lot more than most business schools to keep open, physically open, I should say, rather than go fully online. And I think with the vaccine, I'm hopeful that even if there is a delay, it's a couple of months rather than, maybe part of P1 maybe. But it looks like certainly in the UK will almost certainly come out of lockdown on next week. And I think Europe is in a similar place. So fingers crossed there, but fully hear you on the concern there as well. So I want to focus first of all on the first part of the short-term part. And I think a couple of you mentioned that already in the chat as a pressure. And of course, with the tuition fees and living costs and the rest, I can completely understand why that's can feel pressure. I'm just going to ask on this picture, can anyone notice something about the picture? Can you all see it okay on your screens? Yeah. You type in chat. Well, what strikes you first of all about the picture? What really grabs you? Ups and downs, yeah. Thanks, Gonzalo. Yeah, good point, Sikandar. Yeah, we'll come to that. Come back in a second. Let's wait for a few more comments. Road forks, yeah. Yeah, can't see the whole part, Cindy. Yeah. Yeah, good. That's quite a cool interpretation I get there about the looks bright on the other side. That's a cool comment. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, slight hindrances. I can't see who that's from. Sorry, but yeah. Yeah, Kenneth. Yeah, and I love it. It definitely is a gorgeous view, right? Yeah, I agree fully. So I think you guys got the sense of it. I think as well. I think and tying to a couple. I think Sikandar mentioned also. I think a couple of people have just this idea that because of the pressure, because we're in this very intense time of our lives, right? We tend to focus on the immediate, right? The short term, the short part ahead of us right now. But God, the path keeps going, right? This is such a long path we're going on. It's such an important fork in that. But I think it's sometimes very easy for us to get very, very caught up in the short term, right? And forget that it's a gorgeous path, but it's also a very long one. And it's one we've got to make sure we keep sustaining our motivation, our ability to keep on that road for the long term. So I drew out from just on my life, actually, I was trying to do this. It was quite fun just to draw it out like this way. How has INSEAD fit into my journey? And I had and I think it was really interesting. I was drawing phases of my life. I started from when I finished university, so 97. Sorry if I look ancient, guys, as a result of all this, but a few chapters. So when I finished and started my career, there was a lot of pressure on me to follow a conventional path. I was in strategy consulting. Sorry, I think it's got. You can't see it on the. Sorry. Checking the sound like a sound issue. Can you guys hear now? Is that okay? Yeah.
Mute Zeguo. I think he's forgotten to mute himself, and you're the host. So.
Okay, yeah. So I'll do that actually. So let me mute him now. So okay, cool. Sounds good. Thanks. Thanks. So I started off in consulting. Sorry, I think a couple of things have happened with the slide here. Sorry, here we go. So just with the undergrad, I went into consulting. So I tried to go on a very conventional path to begin with, And then I think I knew that I wanted to go to B school and to INSEAD particularly. And I took a few risks after that. So I worked for an NGO for a year. I had a real interest in international development. I founded an early Facebook, which wasn't successful, as you can probably guess, but it was a cool experience before INSEAD. And then after INSEAD, I also felt the same pressure and went back to the conventional for a couple of years. I had to pay off my debt. I went back to my old employer in consulting in this case. And then there was a really interesting period where I joined eBay in a role where it was a conventional business development role in some regards, but also the chance to do something that I had a real passion for, which was around philanthropy and international development. And while I was in INSEAD, I was the president of Endeavor, the student club. I was really interested in this area and the sort of issues in developing and emerging countries. So with eBay, I accepted a role that helped me to also set up a marketplace on eBay where buyers and sellers on eBay could transact for good causes, for nonprofits around the world, and almost became like a social entrepreneur within eBay, setting up that platform within the company. So I was on a corporate gig and all the rest of it, but it was a good chance to find out what I love doing in a fairly safe environment, right, as well. And from there, I ended up, so I would call eBay a bit of like a hedging period, right? I sort of knew I kind of wanted to go in a direction, but it was nice to have a more comfortable corporate footing. And then I sort of took the plunge after that. I set up, and this is my work for the last 12, 13 years, a couple of nonprofit organizations, both in the area of education. One helping build almost an INSEAD for inner city schools in the UK, helping leaders of those schools get a strong training in management leadership. In the last 9 years, working in India and East Africa, Indonesia, around helping teachers in public schools get motivated. And together, those nonprofits have impacted about 7 million kids over the over that period, basically. So I think what was interesting, and now I'm on a different journey where I've had a real interest in this broader topic on motivation and writing a book. It's coming out next year on it, but also creating a lab to look at how we can apply motivation thinking to different aspects of our lives. Everything from the work arena to how we nurture talent to modern politics and so on as well. But any thoughts from just seeing this sorry for doing this very quickly, but this overall part, any observations from this? What do people notice about this? Maybe just type in chat and we can have a little bit of a discussion. And if I've confused everyone, please tell me as well. I realize I went through this very fast just because of time. But... Yeah, so now there's a mix of risky and less risky, yeah. Very diverse, yeah. Thanks, Ankita. Yeah, Jenny's not over, yeah. Yeah, mix of passion, profession, yeah. Yeah, you got some really good insights here as well. Honestly, I didn't do this deliberately, I should say. Like all this is with the benefit of hindsight, right? Captain Hindsight is sometimes people in UK politics sometimes say as well. And yeah, I think Nicholas has a very good point. I didn't get a full clarity. Well, actually, let me rephrase. I think there's something that I really like what Ashik said just about this idea of saying what we actually doing the things we wanted to do on our INSEAD essays, right? And I remember I was living in Singapore before INSEAD with a startup, and I went to do my INSEAD interview with an alum, and he was a headhunter. And I told him, long term, my essay was all about how I wanted to use my INSEAD skills to help social causes and become a social entrepreneur. And he clearly thought, sorry for my language, but it was just bullshit, and I was just writing this to get in, and was very, very skeptical, to be honest, as well. And it was just an interesting reflection. So, God, how do you avoid this kind of cynicism, right? He was a lovely guy, nothing wrong with that. But there was that sense of it. And one of the things I've struggled with, I think many of you have mentioned in this, is this idea of how do you mix? And there are times in our life when we've got to play safe, right? But I think the challenge is often, if you go back to the example of the path, if you play safe now, it's fine because we do have some priorities, we've got some financial pressures. But what can sometimes happen, I think, is that you get stuck on that safe path and it's very difficult to get off it, right? And you can't go down the winding road that some of you talked about fully as well. And does anyone here know Clayton Christensen? He was a professor, just passed away, studied this year. Does anyone know him as an HBS professor? Anyone come across his work? No? Just checking. Yes. Nicholas, tell me about what do you know about him? Just speak in if it's okay. Sorry, it might be Nicholas. Sorry, I might have pronounced it wrong. Sorry.
No, you're fine. It's Nick. It's fine.
Okay,
I'm familiar with this book. I forget the title of it, but it's essentially he gave a very famous speech, I think, at one of the Harvard graduations, and then wrote a book based on the speech. And it's essentially how to create a life of value and meaning.
Yeah, great summary, Nick, as well. And so, yeah, what he was talking about, he taught hundreds, maybe actually thousands of MBA students over the years. He's famous for his work on disruption, innovation, especially in tech, but he also had a chance to be a bit of a philosopher, and he wrote about this, and he followed many hundreds of HBS alum over the years. And what he found is many of them, although like INSEAD, all of us, of course, very, very bright people, they got stuck in that safe mode for far too long, right? And they weren't able to get off that safe part of the journey that we talked about, the convention part, which you have to do sometimes in life. But they find it very hard to get on to the quirky bits, to do some of the hedging and take the plunges. And I think there's a great professor you might have a chance to have a class with at INSEAD. If you do, please do it. Her name is Hermione Ibarra. And she's done a lot of work on how do you try and make career changes. And I think someone in the chat mentioned how identity has been moving through that. Her big insight is how do you try to take small steps towards where you want to get to, right? So you might need to go on a conventional path, but getting out of the convention back into the hedging. For me, eBay was really, really helpful because it was a great sort of keep one foot in both camps, somewhat safe environment, but at the same time could explore a passion I had, for example. So just that idea of weaving between the short and the long term is just incredibly important there. Does this make sense? Does it resonate? Any thoughts in the chat, or if you want to jump in a comment, please do. Daniel, I saw you. You said designing your life talk. Yeah, can you tell us more about that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think the most it's something that he taught in one of his courses at HBS, just sort of the overall philosophy for guiding your life. But there's a great TED talk out there, I think, where he condenses sort of the message into 20 minutes or so. But the main idea was that what he saw among his classmates is that 5 years out, graduating HBS, they were successful, etc. But they came back like 10 years later, like he went to school with the guy from Enron. And it was just about how people sort of lost their path because they didn't really know like what their missions or sort of what drove them to be successful, sort of the idea.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Daniel. And that's I think that's a really apt piece. I've been very influenced by some of his work, but that thinking of how do you get back and get on the path you want to. And just while we have you guys on here, can you just write down, I think I really like what Ashik was saying about the INSEAD essay. And I'm guessing most of us wrote what we really wanted to do. Just in the chat, do you mind just sharing what was your passion in INSEAD essay? What did you say you wanted to be doing many years after INSEAD? Just love to see that on the chat if it's possible. Yeah, and actually, I'll talk about this thing about the how do you sort of keep fight against the peer pressure. We'll talk about that in a second. That is one of the key problems, I think, and challenges here. Cool. Energy access, I see. Social enterprise. Tech, okay. Cool. AI and healthcare, very cool. Digital health, very cool. So what I'm going to do, actually, keep going, guys, please, as well. It's really cool to see this. And I'm going to send this back to Ashik and to Sugandha and just ask them to save this. And I'd love to send this back to everyone at the end of INSEAD and just say, has everyone still got that passion? It's a good sort of, I think, test for ourselves to, you know, what is what we said in the essay, actually, what we're able to do, even if it's not immediate. And look, and no one has said partner at McKinsey, no one has said Amazon senior exec here, at least directly, but those people are very lucky. If that's what you love doing and that's really what you want to do, that's fantastic, because INSEAD will not only help you with the short-term part, it'll also get you on the long-term one as well. But for most people I've found, I went to the consulting, spent many years before and after, it was a means to an end, right? Let's be honest as well. And it was a very good means to an end. It helped me develop a lot of skills, it helped me pay off a lot of debt that I had, all of these things. But I think just remembering that means to the end point and not making it the end, I think is so important. So thanks, guys, for being so honest and for sharing that as well. So I'm just going to move to the second area here as well, which I think some of you already talked about in what you said in the chat, but this idea of a kind and a wicked problem. And I don't mean wicked in the sort of Wizard of Oz wicked as well, though that my kids certainly love it, love watching that right now as well. But does anyone know what this picture is of here? Can anyone just type in the chat what they think it is? If anyone knows. I'll give you a hint if any some puzzle looks across this. So it happened this year, I'll tell you this. Yeah, cool. Sounds good. I think we've got a lot of people already got this pretty quickly. Okay, and can anyone tell me what happened within? This was, I think, in God, it was at the beginning of the year. I think it was Q1, Q2, somewhere around that time. Does anyone remember what happened within a few days of this event? Something also pretty significant happened. So right on the SpaceX, you're absolutely right there. Any guesses there? Seems to be, yeah, everyone seems to have got anything. Any ideas yet, guys? Share price hierarchy, yeah, that I think that probably did happen, but that wasn't what I, was thinking about, yeah. What else? Any other ideas? Yeah, so this is actually sorry, I'm just putting my plug in, apologies. But yeah, actually a non-business example. So actually Black Lives Matter, the protests happened literally the same week as the SpaceX launch, sorry. And it was such an interesting sort of contrast when I was reading about this, because, you know, something that is as complex, right, as getting us into Mars, we can do. And that's a very, very complicated problem, but ultimately there is a technical solution to that problem, right? But issues around racial injustice, equity, inequality, many of the issues that Black Lives Matter, of course, starting in America and then going across the world, rose. We don't have, there was no solution. And the way we responded to that was far less impressive, right? And so the SpaceX issue is a bit like what I would call a kind problem, right? It's not that it's a difficult problem, but there's ultimately a stable solution that can be found to it. Something like racial inequality, racial injustice, those kinds of issues, they're classic wicked problems where there is no easy technical solution. And what I'm going to suggest, guys, as a piece of maybe advice, I suppose, as well, is here's a wonderful, by the way, just a wonderful quote from Adam Grant, who some of you might have read his work. He's a great organizational psychologist and writes a lot. But he talks a lot about us, I think often in an MBA school, we're taught to, what's our solution, right? What do we want to try and do? What's our idea of the solution? But so much about modern work and success is about finding the right problem to solve in the first place. And I would argue that if you can, try to make that a wicked problem. Because the way that, AI, some of you mentioned in the chat, all of these kinds of things, those stable, those kind problems which have stable technical solutions, they're hard to really deeply fall into the problem, immerse yourself, and make that at least a good part of your life and devote a good part of your life to solving. Does it make sense? So the idea of trying to figure out what is the wicked problem. Many of you mentioned things like healthcare, and some of these are some of the most wicked problems out there. Right? How not so much the technology or the medicine, but more how do you create healthcare systems that do allow equitable access or efficient access, all of the things we're talking about there. But I think just the idea of really trying to find that wicked problem, if you can, before or during INSEAD, and then again thinking of that as that being the long-term path you might want to go towards. And those problems can change over time as well. I chose education for about 13 years of my life, and my God, that was wicked. It was such a complex area of so many issues intertwined, but there were so many things I could do in that time to try to address it, and it gave me so much fulfillment and so much ability to try and shape that problem from different perspectives. Is this making sense? I'm just checking, is it resonating here? Any thoughts? And just to share and chat on this. Do you agree? Am I smoking dope? Tell me if so. I'm really, really open to it.
Makes sense, Sharath.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go on to something we talked about, peer pressure there. But do you all feel like of the things you wrote, many of you were able to very kindly shared that long-term problem you might want to devote yourself to? Just do a sense check. Do you feel that, is it a wicked problem or a kind problem? You're just share in the chat what do you think, if the definition makes sense, right? So does it have a stable technical solution or not? So Skanda asked, yeah, so more examples. So what else would be a good example of I guess I'd say look at the COVID-19 response, right? I mean, this is as wicked as it gets. So it's a great, thanks Skanda for that. Climate change, someone mentioned. Definitely, again, all of these things, there's so much about how we get people together, how we build coalitions, change social norms, change behavior. And typically, I think I'd say wicked problems tend to go well beyond the technology, right? Technology is part of it for sure, but there's something about changing the way people think about an issue and think about behavior that make it so difficult and so wicked in that regard. I think climate change is a great example. Yeah, I think it's a really good, Ashutosh has a cool way of thinking about the AI in healthcare versus the solving healthcare for all. So both of these are noble challenges, right? We can definitely devote years of our life to either. And I don't know about that actually. Someone said there about aren't kind problems related to, can you explain more about that? Someone just said something about kind problems and philanthropy. I can't see who that is, sorry, but just saw the comment. If you want to speak on chat, please go for it. Oh, sorry, on voice, sorry, please add in if you can. Okay, so I'll keep going then in that case if this works. So I think that the main thing is just to do a bit of a sense check, guys, on that idea. And I think the idea that if it is a wicked problem where there's a lot of chance that this will be one that will constantly need to be solved and need to be adapted to, and has a lot more potential, I think, in terms of something to really devote time as well. I want to just conscious of time, so I'm just going to jump onto something that Ashik asked in the chat earlier about this kind of this challenge about keeping up with the Joneses or keeping up with the Kumars, I guess, in whatever context we're in. But you're going to have 650 or so, 600 or so people on 2 campuses who are all super bright, have elements of type A personalities, at least in some form, if my days were anything to go by. And how do we keep ourselves doing what we want to do, what we're deeply seeing as our purpose, rather than what peer pressure might dictate? That's certainly something I grapple with a lot. And even things like, I don't know if Fonty still has that, we had the ding bell where people would sort of, ring the bell if they got dinged for a consulting interview, all that kind of stuff. It just perpetuated that same peer pressure in a strange way, right, as well. And so I was doing a bit of research for the book. This might be behind, before many people's time here, but does anyone know this song at all? Any idea of how this relates to INSEAD? If I was a better singer, I would sing it for you, but I'm not sure. I might resist that temptation just to spare you all from that. So there is the element at INSEAD that sort of this feeling a bit like it can feel like a winner takes all sort of campus, right? There'll be a few people you'll find who each of them get eight consulting offers, that kind of stuff, right? And it's very easy to get sucked into all this and judge ourselves by how we fare in that kind of pecking order, if you like, as well. And if there's one piece of advice I'd also give for your time on campus, please do not get sucked into that game. It's one of the most destructive games that you'll feel yourself in. And for the book I'm writing, I went back to Charles Darwin. I was looking at evolution and theory and this idea of survival of the fittest. We often talk about this in business, right? Jack Welch, you probably all know the story of how he used to fire 10% of his staff. The bottom 10% every year would get fired at GE. And actually, the biological basis for this stuff is nonsense, right? That actually, that's not what Darwin was talking about. Really, what he was saying was that the best way for us to all survive as a species is not by trying to go head to head against each other, but really to be different and to promote diversity. And it's somehow the business world, and I think INSEAD is very similar. It's sort of taken that in a very different way from what it was meant to be. I don't know if any biologists here would want to challenge this. I'm happy to have a challenge if so. But there is this kind of Clint Eastwood, image that we have at INSEAD, that we've got it's all about us and how we fare in that game. And I think one of the things that really struck me talking to even companies in, say, Silicon Valley, where I did some of the research for my book, they were talking about how, if you look at, say, the venture capital world as an example, right, of the talent game we see in our world, the startups that are really successful now are not Me Too's. There are very few categories that we're just doing more of the same with more money is going to work, right? It's really, this is a book called Play Bigger, which is one of the big Silicon Valley Bibles these days. But they were talking about how, the most innovative companies will create new categories, will be distinctive. And you'll learn about sort of value innovation with Chan Kim and Blue Ocean and all that kind of stuff as well. But I think there's a personal parallel to that as well, for us to stand out. Ankit, I think you had a question. Please go for it. Just shout out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to get a few tips on how you do that. I mean, we know we've spoken to a lot of alumni, and they keep saying you'll always feel that the others are better than you at INSEAD in some way or the other, because obviously it's a very diverse class that comes together. Do you mind sharing some tips on, how to keep yourself mentally, continuously believe in what you're doing and have that belief that what you're doing and what you're intending to do is going to get you the results that you hope for?
So I think, again, it's seeing it. It's a really, because I'm no means am I trying to say that I found this easy, right? So I'm sharing this with the perspective of this was one of the hardest things I found, right? But the irony of INSEAD is that we have this incredibly diverse group of people in every sense, nationality and background, as I mentioned, but also cognitive diversity, right? There was a journalist in my group. There was a space scientist, for example, all this, and they thought so differently, right? And the irony, though, is by putting, INSEAD does such an amazing job of getting such a diverse group of people, but by putting them all together in this sort of cauldron, the diversity starts to reduce, not in ethnicity and so on, but in the way people think. And I noticed this, and this kind of sheep-like sort of mentality started to shift in my promotion as well. And I think a lot of it is about how you remember, again, that going back to that image of the path, right, and the long road ahead. Remember why you're doing this, basically, right? This is a means to an end. It's a step. I think what happens is people start to look at, did I get an offer from McKinsey or whoever, as the ultimate bellwether of their own self-worth. And if you can avoid that, I think you're halfway there. Remember, if you want to work at McKinsey afterwards, great. But for most people, that is just a way of getting ultimately to where they want to be long-term. And there are many other ways to get there. And in my class, McKinsey didn't hire very much on campus. It was a bad year. I think it would be much better for you guys. But actually, most of my classmates, in some ways, it actually liberated them. And many of them are doing what they love doing now because they didn't get trapped on that path and kind of caught on that treadmill. So I'd say, sometimes this recruitment, I think someone mentioned at the beginning, it can be a mixed blessing sometimes. I think sometimes it can force us to get on the path we want, the road we want to get onto a bit faster, instead of using some of these short-term things as a bit of an excuse as well. Does that help? Because I'm not sure that there's no magic bullet, but just something that helped me a little bit think about this as I was debating some of these things.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Very cool. Okay. I just want to touch on that. I'm just going fast because of time. I, by the way, can stay on for some time afterwards, but I know some people might need to leave. So I just want to close off briefly. But just something that I think you touched on, Ankita, around this, which was this idea of identity. And I think I saw so many of my promotion describe themselves as INSEAD MBAs or the incoming MBA. And I can see why that helps on LinkedIn. I think Ashish, you mentioned some of this. It's good, right? Again, this is all, if it's a means to an end, great, right? If it helps to get people to link in with you, yes, there's a credibility fact. But I think we need to learn. I think most of you will know Madonna. She's not that young, I think. So she was the master of reinvention, right? And I think if you saw sort of what I drew in my career line, I think the really big theme was around learning to figure out something that interests you, finding that wicked problem that you were interested in. As you got into it, many other things would come out of that, and you evolved and grew at the same time. And the irony of INSEAD, I think, we pay, such a lot of money now for what I'd call these kind of technical seeds we think we're learning, right? Discounted cash flows or marketing strategies and all that stuff. But actually, it was the soil, the softer stuff that I found most useful. How do you work with such a diverse range of people? How do you interact? How do you keep learning as you go? It's a very intense year, so you have to learn fast. That has been much more useful, frankly, than any of the technical stuff. I know enough of the technical stuff to be able to ask okay questions to the right specialists now in what I do. But really what's been much more useful is that ability to work with a very diverse range of people. And what I've seen sometimes happen among INSEAD alum and many other MBA alum, they retreat into a safety net of their lives are with other MBA alum. And they're in this kind of bubble where everyone talks the same language, they use the same terms, they have the same life view. That almost always leads to a very narrow focus of how they think of the world and what success looks like. What I've loved doing is talking in the education space. I'm probably one of the few people with an MBA, not few, but maybe certainly a minority, but learning how that fits in with wider perspectives. How can I add a business perspective to education debates, for example? But gradually, I myself have become an expert in education, even though I never trained in education formally at all. So that softer side of it, that ability that the stuff you'll learn in INSEAD, I think can be much more useful. Let me just close off with one last thought, and I'll just and then we'll just open up, because I know there's pretty awesome questions and things. Sorry for the fast piece, but just the last thing I'll say here is just one picture, and this is my son, my older one, is cricket mad actually, so he plays in the leagues here in the UK. And God, I mean, the amount of dysfunctional parenting. I live in a fairly I guess affluent suburb of London, just outside the city and so on. And there are all these hyper-achievement parents out there. And my God, the projection of their dreams and hopes on their kids is terrifying. And I think a lot of this just comes from not themselves finding their true purpose in their own lives. And I'm sorry, I'm being perhaps brutally blunt here. In their own work in particular. And what I've been finding, I think, is that if we don't get these things right in our own working lives and as professionals, we tend to have all kinds of very sinister side effects on our on there overall. So I just want to say it's so important to get these things right, not just for our own mental sanity and mental health and happiness and motivation, but also for the loved ones that we'll ultimately probably be responsible for. So let me just close off just with just 5 sort of last things to think about. This idea of the long road, remembering that INSEAD is just part of a short path, right? There may be some short paths after INSEAD, but how do you get back to the road? This idea of a wicked problem, keeping ourselves unique and distinctive, that idea of reinvention, and this idea that if you can find that alignment and motivation in our working lives, we're likely to be much more successful in everything beyond it as well. Yeah. So sorry for the whistle stop tour, guys. I know I covered quite a bit in a short space of time. I hope it made sense. But I won't sing it. I'm sorry, sorry, Daryl, on the song. But any thoughts, questions, and so on? I'm very happy to stay on. I know some people might need to jump though as well.
First of all, thanks, Sharath. It's been great to hear your perspective. I think a lot of these thoughts are unique, and I sort of heard them laid out like this. And it's great to hear a different perspective. I'm wondering if you were to do sort of a Clayton Christensen kind of study, when you look at your MBA class, and you think back then compared to now, the people who were living lives of value and meaning, if you want to consider that successful. I'm wondering if you can sort of draw a unifying thread as far as, what sort of value system do they have?
Right.
Decisions at INSEAD after, what sort of mental models did they use? Do you notice anything sort of unifying?
It's a great question. Kind of the line was a bit fuzzy. I think let me just rephrase it just so everyone could hear. I think basically it was a question of, were there any success, if I understood right, any successful traits of people that they thought I were very successful in my promotion, who were able to embody that, if I got that right. So I think there wasn't, I'd say the one thing that really stood out is that I think that the people who really sort of in a financial cell made it, right? They had an IPO or they created something. A lot of that was just down to just blind luck, frankly, right? They happened to often be at the right place, the right time. They weren't the top, they weren't the scholars or on the dean's list or any of that kind of stuff at all. So there is a lot of timing on that stuff. But the ones who I think were genuinely most happy and fulfilled, and they were the ones I think kept to this idea of they knew what they were trying to do long term. They had their own very distinctive purpose. They knew who they were as individuals and leaders and people. And they just kept on, being true to those two core pieces there as well. That's what I'd say would be really the unifying theme that really made that them. So they had ups and downs like all of us, but I think what kept them going was this idea that they knew that North Star of purpose. They had a problem they were deeply committed to solving over their life or over their career. And they really resisted some of the peer pressure, the comparison, the competition, and just had their own internal yardstick. Right? And I think that was really the key insight from all this is that, what motivates us as people, ultimately, you might do this in OB and so on, but really these ideas of purpose, of finding that deep purpose, the idea of autonomy, that we can carve our own path, and the idea of mastery, that we find something we love doing and get better and better at that and love the journey of improvement. It's not the status, the money, all of these things. Those things are what we ultimately call hygiene factors, right? They can stop us being unhappy or unmotivated. They rarely motivate us deeply. And I think the ones who have been, the ones I found who were most fulfilled were the ones who kept to that principle. Nick, as well, if that answers your question.
That's great, thank you.
Kenneth, then you ask about how do you find your purpose? I think that's the time to, what's so cool about this is that if there are ideas that you have already, if you come into INSEAD with that great, and that's fantastic. But if you don't, for example, I had a fascination for the social sector, right? So I used Endeavor shamelessly as a way to get speaker. Pretty much anyone I asked would come to campus. We got some amazing speakers. I got to learn about topics I was deeply interested in. So I think what you were saying, Ashutosh, about INSEAD does have a cachet, and you can pull the people in, curate your own, purpose journey over INSEAD. I know there's time is short, etc., but there will be time if you can use extracurricular events, find like-minded people that have a similar interest, then you can learn with them. There's so many things to use that as well. Sorry.
Unless you're having drinks. You're having our own drinks. Wonderful. Dining will be cozy.
I think someone let me try and mute there. Other thoughts, guys, maybe on the chat or on the okay, here we go. Yeah, so I think Nick is also asking about preparation, guys, as well. So just conscious, first of all, just on timing, Do people need to jump off? If so, no worries. I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes for those who can stay on, but I know I want to respect time as well. What do you guys think?
I think it's safe to go on for another 10 minutes.
Okay.
However, if somebody needs to get off, please feel free to do that.
Thanks, guys. And sorry, there's quite a bit to cover, so apologies for running through as well. But yeah, to prepare, I think what I'd say then, great question, Nick, as well, is if you can use this time, I'm guessing if you're working right now, it's probably winding down, you've got a bit of headspace now. If you can come to INSEAD with some ideas around that purpose, I think in particular, it's so helpful because you can set yourself up when you're there to do all kinds of stuff to explore that more. And you'll have so much, although it will feel pressure, the first couple of periods in particular, you will have more time than any other time in your life probably to just devote it to yourself. It's a very sort of, not self-centered, yeah, but it's for self-improvement. Just try and figure out if you have time to travel a bit, or so we can't travel, but if you can think a bit, reflect, do any of that stuff. It's just a good chance to think, what are 2 or 3 directions I might be interested in? How can I use my time on campus to explore them more? And start talking to people. I think what is quite nice with lockdown is people have much more time. And as Ashish was saying at the beginning, people will open the phone book or the door to have a chat and a discussion. So don't be shy. I think start talking and start thinking is what I'd probably say is the most useful thing as well. Yeah, any other thoughts or questions, guys, or reactions? Very happy to be challenged as well, by the way. And this is my personal perspective on this, but by no means is it a Bible. Maybe Sukanda, Ashok, anything from you guys that you'd say that's perhaps come out that perhaps might be useful to discuss further or go into a bit more? What would you guys say?
Probably Sharath, sorry, somebody saying something?
Okay.
No? Okay, I'll go. So Sharath, maybe you could talk a bit more about, it is great to know that that we have to keep in mind the long-term view, but sometimes there is always that itch that we're not getting the short term right. I think, like you mentioned, maybe it's something to do with the type A personality, maybe it is with just the expectations that we had when we were applying to the program, but some of us do feel that slight itch that we're not getting what we signed up for. So how do you overcome that? I understand that there is a bit of maturity that comes into the play. Maybe over time, when we will actually see the long-term results, we will make peace with it. But is there anything that we can do now to feel okay with the decision?
Yeah, and is that with recruitment or the experience, or what would be the key thing?
I think it's more to do with the experience, because recruitment, there's still time. We don't know how recruitment will happen. Most likely it should happen okay. But with experience, we tend to have that itch. Like, for example, we're not able to experience the smallest things like a pre-MBA trip or just being it together in P1 and P2.
Yeah, so I think the one thing I'd probably do is look at the bright side of that is that although, like, if I did, I did a fully fledged INSEAD, if you like, as well, and it was great. I met so many interesting people. What did happen, especially on Fonte, was quite a big campus then. Most students were there, so it's probably more like the class size you guys will have overall. There were cliques, there were people going into bits, so you didn't get to know everyone in the same way. There is something I've just noticed with the last 9 months, quite democratizing about online in some ways, right? In Zoom, and I understand you guys, the fact you guys are even doing this, we never had anything like this before we started, right? So you're already streets ahead. So what I also found is that there was not that much correlation between people I spent a lot of time on campus with and those who afterwards I spent time, because it depended on where we lived and all of those things. So I think there's also an element of just embracing this and saying that it's also a great way to learn to meet lots of people and perhaps make this a more open environment in some regards. And that was not because of any hostility on campus, just because people were busy and naturally people sort of break into groups that they feel most comfortable. So I think in some ways there's a chance to embrace this and use technology, I think, in in a really good way. And you've already got a very, very strong, thanks to all of your work, and I know that the faculty at INSEAD have done a lot there as well, but that sense of a really overall cohort might even be stronger with you guys. I'm trained to be a professional coach in this new form of phase of life, and all the training was done virtually, even the exam. I just finished yesterday, a couple of days ago, and I was very skeptical about that, saying, God, I'm putting all this money in. You know, I was expected to be with a group in London, learning together. Actually, it was as effective, I think, as well. So I think you might, and I think the way that this will go with the vaccine, it looks like you guys will have probably the best of both, I think, as well on the experience side. So, and you might save some money with some of these trips. Who knows? You know, the bank balance might be even a little bit better than it would have been otherwise. So, yeah.
Got it. Thank you so much. Any final questions that we have from our attendees? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the questions. We have just a couple more minutes for the session. I think not. Otherwise, sorry, was somebody saying something?
Sorry. Yeah, Kenneth here. Sharath, thanks for sharing your thoughts. I guess just to make it concrete, so what should we do in the next 10 days to take action on what we just discussed today? Because I guess finding the purpose, I totally agree with you, but I think it also takes time. It takes reflection, it takes talking to people, it takes trial and error. What can we do in the next 10 days to start and to help us with this? Essentially, what can we do to work on the takeaways from the session today, so that we're one step closer to, you know, finding a purpose and getting into the long-term direction that we really want to do anyway.
So I have a sense a lot of people in INSEAD kind of have some idea of it, right? It's not perfect. So I would say, if you can take some time now, take a journal, a diary, write some of that stuff down, right? Write the different influences. Just actually try and give yourself some headspace where you're not in the day-to-day sort of madness for a while. And just see if you can have that headspace to take some thoughts down and think about, like, I would say, like, develop a little bit of a plan. I mean, like a few bullet points on how will you use INSEAD to help you advance that, right? So I think it's almost the question of not, how does INSEAD serve us, our purpose, rather than us serving kind of that, that sort of corporate INSEAD, right? Which I think, so just how do you try and flip that and not get caught up in all this? And I think if you can keep that, take that with you to the campus and use that as a bit of a thing to keep referring to every week, every couple of weeks, so just say, what progress am I making? And I think what it will also do is that, like, for me, I knew that my interest in the social sector, I couldn't do it right after INSEAD, just financially it was not possible to do. And that was fine, because I sort of knew that how I was trying to build that. And as you're making decisions, if it's a recruitment option or internship or projects you're doing, etc., just use that as a bit of a guide. Is this going to take me in a direction roughly that will help me in that thing, or is it going to be a complete distraction or a complete sidestep? But it's really that simple, I'd say, and well. But what it does take is a bit of quiet time to think. Maybe talk to people who you're close to and ask them about how they see you and how they view you as well. And I'm happy to send if it's helpful, I can send some ideas on how to do that more practically. I'd love to engage. I just haven't had time because this new phase of life has started, but I would love to engage INSEAD more structurally about this, because I think during the experience, it would be really amazing to have some of these reflection points a bit more weaved into the whole experience as well, so that gives people time to do that. But I think at the moment, I think a lot of it's stuff we can all do individually as participants as well.
Sharath, we would love to
Great
have
advice.
included in the program as well, because this year especially we're seeing a lot of alumni coming in, so we would love to have you in the program. Please let us know if we can help you in any way, but of course you have better ties with the school. But meanwhile, thank you so much, Sharath, for such a thought-provoking session. There was so much to take away from the session. And Kenneth, he very brilliantly summarized everything with his last question. We're looking forward to your book that is coming next September. And meanwhile, I'll pass it on to Oshik to thank the audience.
Yeah, so thank you everyone. Thank you to our audience for your active participation. As we mentioned earlier, this session has been recorded and we'll upload this onto YouTube maybe by tomorrow. If you're not subscribed to our channel yet, or if you're not following us on Instagram yet, we've dropped the link in the chat box. Do join us back for more of our weekly videos, and we hopefully will have another live session soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Sharath, for joining.